to you with the kind compliments of Republic Bank Limited, Hubbards, and Classic Lighting.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special edition of Our Climate Reality. And of course, before we do anything else, I want to salute all our women this evening. It's International Women's Day, and of course, we are ever so grateful for the very important and significant role that our women play in our lives in every way possible. Tonight we're looking at climate change and women, and we have three very distinguished guests with us. From Barbados, we have the Honorable Chantal Munro-Knight. She is the Minister in the Prime Minister's Ministry. We also have Dr. Decima Williams, the President of the Senate, and Ms. Elaine Henry McQueen. She's the Program Coordinator for the Grenada Spotlight Initiative for UN Women. We will be talking to them about various aspects of women and climate change, how climate change impacts women, and of course the role that women can play in the fight against global warming. Gender inequality, coupled with the climate crisis, is one of the greatest challenges of our time. It poses threats to ways of life, livelihoods, health, safety, and security for women and girls around the world. Historically, climate change scientists, researchers, and policymakers have struggled with how to make the vital connections between gender, social equity, and climate change. As more and more data and research reveal their clear correlation, it's time to talk about the disparate impacts of climate change and the linkages between women's empowerment and effective global climate action. On International Women's Day, we take a look at how climate change impacts women, girls, why gender equality is key to climate change, and what you can do to support solutions for women by women. When we come back from the break, we'll ask our guests to tell us a little bit about themselves, and then we'll get into our discussion this evening. We'll be back with you in a moment.
You're watching Our Climate Reality on GBN Television, brought to you in part by Republic Bank Limited, Hubbards, and Classic Lighting.
Building or renovating your home or business? Why not use clean, renewable energy? Install solar panels to power your home and office and see your energy costs go down and your savings go up. Using renewable solar-powered energy protects our environment, reduces our carbon footprint, and slows the devastating impact of climate change. Republic Bank help to finance construction and renovations that make use of renewable energy. Visit any Republic Bank branch and ask about renewable energy financing options today.
Republic Bank, we're the one for you.
Solar Vision is the champion. We're lighting up the whole Caribbean. Solar Vision is the champion. We lighting the whole Caribbean. The ultimate solution to get rid of pollution. We going green to be healthy. Going green for security. Going green for prosperity. Going green with Solar Vision. Going green.
Available at Grenada Trade Center, Montrouge, St. George. For more information, call 444-5291 or 404-9012.
Whether you're shopping for hardware, building materials, and appliances, Hubbard's Building Supplies at Grand Anse is the place to shop. With improved facilities, increased parking, wider variety of products, and a trendy and spacious layout, catering for all your shopping needs. Why wait? Visit Hubbard's Building Supplies today. Now open Mondays to Fridays, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and Saturdays, 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. Hubbard's. Quality service, affordable prices.
Welcome back, everyone. And again, those of our listeners on K105 FM and our friends on our Facebook page and YouTube channel, of course, those on GBN Television, we are happy to have you. And of course, we're looking forward to a great discussion this evening. So before we get into a discussion, we'll invite our guests, and we will start with the Honorable Chantal Monroe-Knight. Minister, good evening. Welcome to the program. We'd like to give you 30 seconds so you can tell us a little bit about yourself before we start our discussion.
All right. Thank you. And thank you so very much for having me on this very important program. And I really need to commend you for having a program on International Women's Day that looks specifically at the topic of women and climate change. So I'm the minister in the Prime Minister's office, a fairly new minister. I came in January of 2022. And I cover quite a few different portfolios as minister in the Prime Minister's office. I have responsibility for culture, for sustainable development goals as well, which includes, of course, issues of climate change. I work across ministries to help mobilize and to build coherence, certainly around government's nationally determined contributions and our interventions in the context of initiatives around climate change like COP. One of the other things that I do as well is also in terms of public sector reform and a number of other initiatives. But I also have a long background within the nonprofit sector. I've spent the large majority of my life in the nonprofit sector. And therefore, I know the two guests that are here very, very, very well. And I'm really delighted to be on this panel with such strong and powerful women who have, such a history and a background and a rich knowledge of working on the issues of gender equality as well.
Thank you very much, Minister. Let's go to Mrs. McQueen. You're no stranger. You're part of the GBN family. And
Thank you very much. I am. It certainly feels like it.
But for those of us, maybe listening for the first time and for viewers on our Facebook page outside of Grenada, just tell us a little bit about Elaine Henry McQueen.
Elaine Henry McQueen is a girl from St. Patrick's, also known as Debbie. I haven't said that here before. I have been a teacher, I've been a trades unionist. For the longest time though, I've been working in the field of gender and development. Started with the NGO movement as a volunteer, and then, of course, that's where I met and worked along with Honorable Chantal Monroe-Knight in that other capacity for some time. And then I worked with the government to head the gender machinery, that's the Division of Gender and Family Affairs, for a number of years. And now I work with the UN to coordinate this project, and I'm really, really happy that GBN and the team have decided to engage in these kinds of discussions and to honor women for the day and to look at this specific issue of women and climate change this evening. So I thank you so very much for having me, and I'm really happy to be as well with Sister Decima sitting here and with Honorable Chantal on the line to be in this discussion this evening.
Yeah, thank you very much. And you always learn something new. I never knew you were for St. Patrick.
Yeah.
Dr. Williams, 30 seconds.
Thank you for having us, and I introduced myself by saying Happy International Women's Day to all women across Grenada, across the Caribbean, across the world. My name, as you said, is Decima Williams, and I come from St. Andrews. I have been an activist in the NGO world around a variety of issues, children's rights, women's organizations, and I taught university for many years in the United States, in teaching sustainable development and women and gender, women and development. I served in Grenada as a diplomat, and in that capacity did a fair amount of climate diplomacy, climate negotiations, and I am currently in the Senate, where I do hope we're able to take up some legislative support for climate justice and climate action in general here in the Grenada setting.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. And, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned climate justice, you know, coming to the end of your little introduction. And so we are going to go straight back to Honorable Knight. Barbados has described climate change as climate justice. Talk to us about that. How is that relevant to women?
All right, thank you for that question. I think everybody knows we have an awesome advocate in our Prime Minister who's really been the voice advocating on this issue of climate change and this notion of climate justice. And that really is about calling attention to the fact that although developing countries, small and developing states, bear the brunt of the worst impacts of climate change, we are not the ones who are the main perpetrators of the actions that are endangering us in the context of climate change. And that notion of climate justice requires, calls, challenges developing countries and perhaps all of us to be able to address the concerns of climate and its impact. We actually call it a climate crisis, a crisis for all of us, but more so for countries that are on the front line of it. Again, small and developing states such as ours. It calls then for some level of repair in the context of concrete actions that would help us to be able to adapt to climate change, and also as well a recognition that there is a level of injustice in the context of, one, how funds are allocated in relation to addressing the issues of climate. There is a level of injustice in relation to the impacts, and therefore it really is calling for a fairer system and dialogue around the issue of climate change.
For climate change. You know, share with us, you know, about that initiative and how can that actually benefit our region?
Sorry, I didn't hear everything, but I
the issue of the Bridgetown, the Bridgetown initiative. Yeah. Can you talk to us about that?
Absolutely. And I know you asked me as well in terms of, you know, how the notion of climate justice and helps women, and I'll speak to that in the context of also speaking about the Bridgetown initiative. One of the fundamental things about the Bridgetown initiative is really calling for structural reform of international financial institutions, including multilateral development banks. It's calling for reform in the ways that finance is delivered to developing countries, and for us to look at new and different and innovative ways in order to ensure that there is, again, a fair allocation of resources to assist in the context of all of the various climate impacts that we will face as small countries, So the Bridgetown initiatives advocates for a number of different ways that finances should be delivered, and particularly concessional finances. One of the things that the Bridgetown initiative responds to is the fact that we are increasingly debt-ridden countries, So that the way that finance is delivered now further increases our debt profile, and that in the context of structural reform, we must address that quite frontally and ensure that the modalities for us to be able to receive financing recognizes that in a fundamental way. And so a couple of the things that the Bridgetown initiative calls for, and I'll speak to them very simply, is, for instance, we are seeing, and Barbados is actually one of the main countries with what is called disaster clauses within our agreements, our loan agreements as well, So what we are saying is, listen, if we have these disaster clauses, it means that debt payments should actually be suspended for a period of time to allow us then to deal with a natural disaster without incurring a lot of the charges and those sorts of things in terms of interest payments that happen in that cause. So it calls for a natural suspension, of the repayment as we tend to address some of the challenges that we have in the context of a natural disaster. And that is important because very often that is sometimes not taken on board, that at the same time that you're trying to do repair, at the same time that you're trying to reconstruct, you're also then faced with paying off this massive debt at the same time. When we talk about that and we talk about the issue of gender and how that benefits women, if we are able to reform the international financial institutions and the way that finance is delivered and the quantum of finance that is available and the kinds of finance that is available as well, it means then that we have more resources to be able to address some of the structural inequalities that face us in the context of gender equality. It means that as we encourage multilateral development banks to make available more policy-based loans on concessional basis, that we then have more resources to deploy to design our policies to make sure that they are gender responsive and that we apply a gender lens in the context of how, as we rebuild in the face of natural disasters, that we are able to take care of some of those critical concerns. And I think that is the important message that we are sending in the context of the Bridgetown Initiative. We're talking about the fact that, again, we want multilateral development banks to improve the quantum of resources that are available for us to develop, for us to address climate impacts as well, and to realize that that is a fundamental challenge that we are facing. And it wasn't always that way, that there was a recognition that climate and its impact are going to impact every single area of our lives, economically, financially, as well socially. When you look at a natural disaster and the devastation that that has, we don't always appreciate that the impact is actually different across gender, and how women have to interface in the context of a natural disaster is often different than men because of the existing structural inequalities within our societies. So that if we can have that structural reform, it then means that as countries, we are better able to design policies then to address some of the structural inequalities.
Right. Two things before we go to our break. As it relates to the Bridgetown Initiative, support from other Caribbean leaders. How is that? How is the support? And secondly, what sort of response are you getting globally as it relates to the Bridgetown Initiative?
I said on the regional fund, I think that we are of one mind in the context. So at a number of different regional fora, we have had 100 support from our CARICOM colleagues, even in the context of the last COP that was in Egypt as well. There was a resounding absolute call by all of our regional leaders in the context of the Bridgetown Initiative. And that was actually reflected as well, even in the text and some of the decisions that were made around COP. So if you look at the text, if you look at the statement that came out of the president of COP, you would see mention of the Bridgetown Initiative. And the Bridgetown Initiative is having such resonance. I'm sure that you are well aware that the IMF recently launched the Resilience and Sustainability Fund. And that was as well a direct response to the advocacy of the Prime Minister for structural reform of the international financial institutions. And the IMF responded with this fund. Barbados is one of the first countries in order to be able to access the funding, but it provides a longer term in terms of repayment for countries, lower interest rates as well. And so that we are seeing a lot of buy-in globally for the Bridgetown Initiative and that structural reform. It is one increasing debate about the need for the structural reform as well, but also as well, we are seeing not only within the region, but other developing countries as well recognizing and joining on board for the advocacy of the Bridgetown Initiative.
Right, wonderful. Final question. For example, internationally, we just saw what happened in Turkey and Syria with the earthquake, and people are complaining, not enough support, it's not coming quick enough. People who are already vulnerable, they're now in a worse position. In the Caribbean, we're vulnerable to severe weather systems like hurricanes and so. If we were to be in a similar situation, and we saw what happened in the Bahamas some couple of years ago with that hurricane, if we had a major hurricane that had caused serious disaster, that fund, for example, that you made mention that the IMF has available, will it be enough?
Sorry, I wasn't sure I heard the last part of the question. You were saying that fund. You mean?
Yes, you made mention of the
that would be able to be deployed.
Yeah. Will it be enough to support if we were faced with a disaster of similar nature?
So I'll answer your question in this way. I think that we first of all have to recognize, as you said, that there is an issue in terms of the availability of funds. So that's what the Bridgestone Initiative is advocating for, right? So that advocacy is going to be ongoing. That level of structural reform is going to be ongoing. And again, going back to your first question, that we do need a whole of region approach in order to continue that advocacy. I think secondly as well, the context of whether or not that fund will be enough. I mean, it's hard to estimate. I mean, the scale of devastation on our countries, it can, the level, sometimes you can't necessarily measure or can anticipate as well. So what the Bridgestone Initiative is calling for, as you said, is the different modalities, the quick release of the funds and the resources, and then also as well for developing countries to honor their commitments to make resources that they committed to available, particularly in the context of the COP. We saw coming out of COP27 that we missed, the promise of that envelope of funds, the 100 billion funds that was supposed to be available then for it to deal with climate action was not delivered by developing states. So I can't say to you that right now, today, if we had, a massive event, that there will be funds available there. I think the advocacy has to be ongoing, but it also calls on us as well to be able to use our agency as well to be able to press the international community for the availability of funds, but for also as well for us to prepare. And that starts with what you were doing in terms of having the conversation on why it is important, for us to put this as a priority, as a frontline topic as well.
Thank you very much, Minister. We take a short break. When we come back, we'll hear from Dr. Decima Williams. Stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment.
Building or renovating your home or business? Why not use clean, renewable energy? Install solar panels to power your home and office and see your energy costs go down and your savings go up. Using renewable solar-powered energy protects our environment, reduces our carbon footprint, and slows the devastating impact of climate change. Republic Bank can help to finance construction and renovations that make use of renewable energy. Visit any Republic Bank branch and ask about renewable energy financing options today.
Republic Bank, we're the one for you.
Whether you're shopping for hardware, building materials, and appliances, Hubbard's Building Supplies at Grandans is the place to shop. With improved facilities, increased parking, wider variety of products, and a trendy and spacious layout, catering for all your shopping needs. Why wait? Visit Hubbard's Building Supplies today. Now open Mondays to Fridays, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and Saturdays, 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. Hubbard's. Quality service, affordable prices.
Solar Vision is the champion. We lighten up the whole Caribbean. Solar Vision is the champion. We light right in the whole Caribbean. The ultimate solution to get rid of pollution. We're going green to be healthy, going green for security, going green for prosperity, going green with solar vision. We're going green.
Available at Grenada Trade Center, Montrouge, St. George. For more information, call 444-5291 or 404-9012.
Welcome back, everyone, and of course we thank Minister Knight for such wonderful information. Dr. Decima Williams, you have done significant amount of work, of course, with women and in other areas. As it relates to women and climate change, what are the gender considerations that arise as a result of the impacts of climate change?
Thank you. Historically, men and women have occupied very different roles in society, and their understanding of society arises from that as well. So it is not surprising that they would experience or come to climate change differently. Now, some of those differences are very wide, I would say, according to where the person is in society, how much education you have about the matter, or how much money you have, or how much concern you have about it. But there are differences between men and women. Let's take that as a given. And therefore, I think perhaps we could identify 3 ways in which including women and their understanding and their roles matter. First of all, women's experiences would help to fill out a more thorough understanding of the impacts of climate change. If we, for example, speak of in the field of health, you know, the heat that has been expanding since the heating up of the environment. Well, women are responsible for taking care of children and of elderly, sick children, even themselves. And that hot air, especially on women houses where there are no air conditioning and so on, it makes it more difficult for women to function and fulfill their duties all day long. Whereas maybe the guy is out fishing, he's near the sea breeze, or he is in an office, he's under an AC, and so on. Of course, there are more and more women moving into these more up-end jobs. But we're speaking overall that there would probably be more women in Grenada experiencing heat more intensely and are able to do less about it than men. So, and we can go down the list. For example, water. You know, as we lose water supply, that impacts on women. They have home, they have to cook, they have to do laundry, they have to get things done, to take care of their own personal health. And they're unable to do so because the water is shut off and it's not available and so on. So I think climate change, the impacts of it are felt differently. And we have to know that so policies could be based on the full range of impacts. Secondly, because women are experiencing climate impacts in the way that they do, their responses can be different. And so what they would propose as the way to correct these ills could be different from what the average man would. So the responses of women, again, have to be put in to get a complete understanding of how society can respond. And thirdly, I think as decision makers, women have to be at the table, again, because they bring that sense, that experience of difference, you know, particularly at the local level. If the food supply, you know, is being reduced because of change in the seasons, what are we to do in terms of agricultural policy, water policy, what should be the advocacy of any given community or country. And so I think having women at the table also helps to make those recommendations and decisions much more applicable and more meaningful for society. So in various ways, and of course you can also think of it, women's presence represents a maturing of any given democracy. A society in which more men in an unbalanced way are involved in decision making or engaged in implementation of programs really represents a bit of a democratic deficit that all parties affected by any phenomena in society should be given a fair chance to also be part of those who be searching for solutions.
Wonderful. We've highlighted a number of things here, 3 to start. But how do you think these issues can be dealt with? And let's start locally, and then probably we would look at the region and internationally.
I personally think, first of all, that there needs to be more education and information sharing in a participatory way. You know, climate change has been talked about now for many, many years, and some persons are not quite sure how it affects them, how it's unfolding. And so I think it is important for us to learn more about it. I'm pleased to see school children have debates on it, and there is some broad understanding. We need to learn how it affects the community and the society. So that is important, and I think demonstration projects help. With the problem in food production, let's say, one of the things that we can do is understand how women who produce small, short crops and vegetable gardens, you know, how they could continue to make their livelihoods and how they're able to protect the crops that they are producing to get that livelihood. So there are ways in which the community level people can work together. Grenade, one of the NGOs with which I'm still associated, has been involved in replanting trees on the riverbank in Balthazar to hold up the banks and to prevent the damage from the river flooding with these unseasonal rains that we've been having. And men and women have been involved because they do different things. Some of the women do more vegetables and some of the guys do more goats and cows and so on. So I'm not sure that I'm answering your question thoroughly, but certainly at the local level. Then, as I said, at the national level here in Grenada, there are many policies and many institutions to which women should be invited to participate. For example, the climate change committee, I think it is, out of the Ministry of Climate Justice and Climate Resilience, should involve the women who are engaged in food production, in health, in the solar panels, in wind, and there are more and more women coming into these new sectors that provide relief from climate change. I think they need to be nationally engaged and to be I hate to say the word use, but to be facilitators of the spreading of that information that I talked about. And another idea that I'd like to propose is that climate financing, the funding for the response to climate impacts should also target women, because that is a way of speeding up our response. The more persons who are willing and able and competent and reach others. Women manage households, and so if they have access to finance for, you know, solar cookers or basic technology. Today we're celebrating women and technology. So we need financing that could bring appropriate technology more, closer to women so that they could solve their day-to-day problems, and in doing so help to solve the national problems, the national goal of being more resilient by, yeah.
Okay, quickly, I just want to bring back Minister Knight. On that same issue, what is happening in Barbados as it relates to what Dr. Williams just spoke about, the gender impacts and considerations? What is done in Barbados as a way of helping women to deal with it?
Thanks for that. So first, let me just agree with Decima on that notion of the need for greater education. We can talk about the policies that we've implemented, right? So in 2019, this government appointed a committee to look at the issue of gender-based violence. A cabinet approved and appointed high-level committee to look at gender-based violence. We can talk about the training that we're doing with the police. We're talking about the training that's being done with the judiciary, and also at the parliamentarian level to bring understanding of the issues that at the policy level that we build kind of awareness and the work that is being done within schools. So the Ministry of Education, has launched what they call a sensitivity kind of a program, so that right across the school system, there's awareness of the issues of gender. We have a workplace initiative to work with the private sector to be able to make sure that within the private sphere, that we're also talking about these issues of gender equality. What does it look like for women? But I do think that very fundamentally as well, when we talk about, that local national approach and that individual woman within her home as well, the need for all of us to be able to build greater awareness. Barbados is not, and I'm certainly not going to say that we have it all correct, but I think that it is about leadership. It is about continuing dialogue as well, and certainly in the context of climate change and its direct impact. One of the things that we have been doing here is having that dialogue, so that notion of climate and gender now is part of the conversation among Barbadians and among Barbadian women especially. So for instance, in the context of agriculture, there's a lot of work being done with small farmers there. And particularly women. There's a lot of work being done with women entrepreneurs as well to get them to understand and to build capacity on there at that end. So, specific initiatives around renewable energy and designing policies as well that are going to be gender sensitive and gender responsive in the context of the going green jobs and what that will look like and how we can situate women in there are now part of the narrative that wasn't there before. So leadership as well is extremely important.
Thank you very much, Minister. So we take a break. When we come back, we'll be hearing from a champion for women's rights and women's equality here in Grenada. Stay with us. We'll be back with you in just a moment.
You're watching Our Climate Reality on GBN Television, brought to you in part by Republic Bank Limited, Hubbards, and Classic Lighting.
Building or renovating your home or business? Why not use clean, renewable energy? Install solar panels to power your home and office and see your energy costs go down and your savings go up. Using renewable solar-powered energy protects our environment, reduces our carbon footprint, and slows the devastating impact of climate change. Republic Bank can help to finance construction and renovations that make use of renewable energy. Visit any Republic Bank branch and ask about renewable energy financing options today.
Republic Bank, we're the one for you.
Solar Vision is the champion. We're lighting up the whole Caribbean. Solar Vision is the champion. We lighting the whole Caribbean. The ultimate solution to get rid of pollution. We're going green to be healthy. Going green for security. Going green for prosperity. Going green with Solar Vision. Going green.
Available at Grenada Trade Center, Montrouge, St. George. For more information, call 444-5291 or 404-9012.
Whether you're shopping for hardware, building materials, and appliances, Hubbard's Building Supplies at Grandans is the place to shop. With improved facilities, increased parking, wider variety of products, and a trendy and spacious layout, catering for all your shopping needs. Why wait? Visit Hubbard's Building Supplies today. Now open Mondays to Fridays, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and Saturdays, 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. Hubbard's. Quality service, affordable prices.
Welcome back. It's our climate reality, and of course we're talking women and climate change, a very, very important issue. We want to bring in Mrs. Elaine Henry McQueen into the conversation right now. What are some of the programming is taking place in Grenada in relation to assisting women and men in responding to the impacts of climate change?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for that question. But before I speak, about what's happening, could I just summarize a bit of where we're at?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And so in terms of where we are, I would like us to note that the Minister for Climate Resilience and the Environment is a woman, a young woman, Karen James, and congratulations to her. Happy Women's Day to you. And so that is a place where we can start. We are also at a place where we see a lot of the major projects, the national projects and national plans that are related to climate change have a gender mainstreaming component, which means that gender equality is one of the targets within those projects, and actions should be taking place for promoting or advancing gender equality and women's empowerment through quite a lot of the national projects that are ongoing. We're also at a place where there is a national sustainable development plan which is aligned to the sustainable development goals, and that plan also infuses gender equality within it, and so it sets the stage where that can happen. But that's on very positive side. But we're also at a place where there is higher unemployment among women, and that's a persistent trend for a very, very long time. And even at the very last labor force survey report, we learned that the employed workforce is 56% men, 44% women. The overall unemployment rate, when we look at overall unemployment, it is higher for women. That's at 19.5%, lower for men at 14.2%. But especially among young women and among heads of households. In the case of heads of households, it is 19.2% female heads of households, but 9.8% among male heads of households in terms of unemployment. Where we're at also is that women and girls occupy a lot of seats, a lot of participate very well in large numbers in universities and higher education. But when we come to talk about fields in science, technology, mathematics, engineering, and the arts, STEAM, we see fewer women in those fields. And the link to climate action and climate justice and so on is that a lot of those fields are actually the fields that prepare people, males and females, for the technical work and the leadership roles in dealing with climate change, right? But fewer women and girls are studying those fields. What we're also seeing is that the persistent stereotypes that face women also limit our abilities to adjust, to adapt quickly if there were to be a climate disaster. So, for example, a lot of women don't swim, more so than men don't swim. Climbing trees, being able to fend for ourselves out of a home, finding and fetching food and things like that. These kinds of skills are not as prevalent among women and girls, so that if there were to be some kind of disaster that requires us to use a lot of physical strength and move around and climb trees, say a tsunami or something, and we need to run up the hill quickly or climb a tree and grab on and so for a long time, it means that we might be at we are expected to be at a disadvantage. Of course, it doesn't mean that that's where we need to stop, but this is, as I'm saying, this is where we're at. And so the opportunities that Grenada has been utilizing to address climate change and climate adaptation and so on needs to look at these particular realities. Now, there are some climate related projects ongoing in Grenada, like the Engender project, which is it's a project of the United Nations and that supports the government and people, especially in relation to climate resilience and disaster preparedness. Then there is the G-Cruise project, which has to do with water safety and so on. We see projects in relation to defenses and solar systems and projects in relation to introducing alternative forms of energy into Grenada and so on. And these are excellent projects. The question is to what extent they assist with ensuring that men and women benefit equally and are prepared equally for climate adaptation and so on. And that's where I think there is a breakdown. Sometimes it's not because of the intention of the project, because in fact, gender mainstreaming is written into a lot of those projects and proposals and policies, right? What I have found, including in the project that I'm working on, the Spotlight Initiative, is that one of the challenges is that we do not have enough technically sound persons working on gender mainstreaming and gender equality in overall. So there are a few, but not very many, and not in all of the places where they need to be. So that it is not uncommon for a project or policy to be written saying, for example, that there is greater poverty among single-parent families, where it's a female-headed household. And we need to do something about it. But then, middle of the project, end of the project, very little is done about it, and then we have to take that same problem and put it into a next project later on. And things like that happen continually. And that is, I think, where a bit of the breakdown is. Fortunately, there are projects like the Spotlight Initiative and others like Engender, which will be supporting the state and civil society in building their capacity. So we hope that through this, there will be a greater number of persons who are versed or more competent in assisting with the whole business of mainstreaming gender, ensuring that the promises for equality actually get implemented so that it moves from paper to reality. It moves from what's in the policy to what's in the lives of the men and women and boys and girls in every village, in every household. Yeah, because that's what we really would want to see.
Right. Now the whole issue of climate change, it affects everyone, not just policymakers, because policymakers cannot solve the problem. Everyone must get on board. So what can individual citizens do to help to, you know, what role can they play in helping this thing to move forward and to make it happen?
All right, so as individuals, we are the ones who make up society, right? So there are lots of things we can do. One is that we can choose to empower ourselves. Empowerment is not about what somebody else does. It's about what the individual does for himself or herself, within himself or herself, right? Empowerment is about self, inside, what's happening within us, in our minds, and where do we see ourselves? What role do we carve for ourselves? What do we do to prepare ourselves for the opportunities that may come, or create opportunities that may not even, you know, come otherwise? So we can choose to empower ourselves as women, as men. We can choose to find the opportunities, make use of the courses that are happening. The National Training Agency and TMR Community College, NULO, etc., have been advertising courses for, and some of them had to do with the, and a project I did not mention earlier on, SIEP, the Climate Smart Agriculture, and then, you know, so these programs are there and they offer opportunities to us as individuals. Do we make use of those opportunities? I'm particularly asking women and girls today, consider the opportunities that are there for learning to set up solar panels, for learning to do the work in relation to coding and artificial intelligence and so on. As women, do not limit ourselves to what society, quote unquote, broadly might have said is man's work and women's work. Get into the fields of plumbing and electrical engineering and things like that. That's where, you know, the trajectory shows that these are the kinds of jobs that are needed now more than ever, and even more so in the future, right? So as women, I'm particularly encouraging us to make use of those opportunities, but don't you know, stop at going to a level 1 or a level 2 course and end there and then go back to work in a shop or something, you know, type. Those jobs are good too, but of course they are lower paying jobs. Continue in the field and gain the skills and challenge the men and boys, challenge the women who run companies and who lead businesses and who are managers to employ you and show that you can do it too, because the opportunities are ever increasing. The space is opening up. It's up to us in a lot of the time to make use of it. Another thing we can do is, as a society and men and boys, is to break the stereotypes. So it's not only on the women to break the stereotypes, but also on the men and boys to break the stereotypes and welcome women and girls to work alongside you in those fields of science and technology and so on. We can also end violence against women and girls, because violence, for example, sexual harassment, is a great limitation sometimes on women to participate in certain things. We hear the song, all of us know the song, and I was reminded of it today in a fantastic ceremony that the government had. That song, they want to keep their money, I can keep my honey and die with my dignity, right? And that song that speaks about sexual harassment, of course, we know that that should not be a choice, right? It should not be a choice of whether or not I have money or my dignity. By right, my human right is that I should have both. I am entitled to both an income and my dignity. And so therefore we need to ensure that violence against women and girls comes to an end so that women can be safe to work alongside men and boys, have male supervisors, and be safe, that men and boys in their homes will not be violent towards them, and they would be safe to walk the street and come from work if they have an evening shift, a night shift, job ends at 11 p.m., she should feel safe to be in a public transport or a private transport or walk the street and not be assaulted, not be just afraid that somebody is going to attack her. That is so limiting, it's not funny. And so we need to, these are some of the things that as individuals we can do. And of course, we hope that the society, we expect the society, the policymakers and the leaders to support that process to bring that change. But these are some of the things that as individuals we can all do.
Thank you very much. We have 5 minutes remaining. I have one question I want to throw out to all of you. I don't know who is going to go first, right? But a 2019 study found that national parliaments with more women pass more stringent climate policies. Is that a call for women or more women to get involved in politics? I don't know who's going to go first.
I think it is. It's a call, it's also an evidence that when there is greater balance in leadership, there is likely to be greater balance and, more improved policy for all and law.
Yes, I think this arises from general studies that have shown that where there are more women in decision-making positions, particularly in legislation, and so that you get more emphasis on social policy passing, so that the whole of society is attended to, rather than, policies maybe just on investments and on the financial sector as such. And this has been true now in the case of the search for climate justice and the response to the climate crisis, that women see it as a greater urgency and are willing to take bigger stabs at it. And in this sense, I want to salute the work of Mia Mottley, Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados, because as a woman, she has brought her leadership into the climate finance, global finance arena by calling for larger quantums, designated quantums, new and more accessible rules in the climate finance space. And I think she has, as I said, as a woman and a Caribbean woman from a small country, is making a major impact to climate policy in a way that has the potential to spread a lot of benefits for people to finance their way out of the crisis.
Minister Knight?
Well, I mean, that's what just said it, right? Maybe talk about the power of women's leadership. I mean, we have the prime example, but not that as well. I mean, if you look globally within the UN, the resonant voices as well that are coming from young women as well, strong and powerful voices. Calling attention to the issue of climate change and gender equality important. It's about the sensitivity, it's about the lens as well, and it's about that clear understanding that Elaine alluded to and Desmond alluded to, of the interconnectedness that exists in terms of policy making and the need to ensure that we address those critical concerns, because those are going to be the things that are going to allow our society to develop as we want them to address the issues of equality, to address the issues of fairness and justice and all of those sensitive things that oftentimes we don't want to hear discussed. We don't feel that they have a place in the context of how we do development. All of those things are things that women bring to bear, because we understand, again, how they are the thread that are going to be important in terms of keeping our society together. The last thing I just want to say as well, it's also the leadership. I mean, when you look at the NGO community as well. I mean, it's been women and women leadership in the nonprofit sector as ordinary citizens. It's been women farmers and their voices and stuff as well that have also been calling attention to these issues. So women have continued to be leaders in the context of calling for climate justice and addressing issues of climate change and gender equality.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. Well, we're practically out of time, and I'm really thankful that you three women accepted our invitation. So as a mark of my thanks, I'll give each of you 1 minute to make a closing remarks. Elaine, let's start with you.
Okay, so thank you. I just want to say thanks to you for inviting me to be here, and to my colleague panelists for this discussion. I encourage all of us in Grenada, CARICOM, PT Martinique, and of course the wider Caribbean and the world to make our mark, to think of what we can do in our own way, as well as through our technical work and our leadership and whatever roles we play, to ensure that our societies are as safe as possible from climate change, that we can adapt, we are resilient, but also that we are doing so in a gender equal way, that we are looking after the interests of men and women equally. I also want to congratulate those who've gone before us in these kinds of work, noting that both gender equality and climate resilience are cross-cutting themes for development, and for all of those persons who did that work even before us today, and like Decima, who in AOSIS many years ago, and so many others before, that we thank you for bringing it on the agenda and for ensuring that now more can be done. Let us make use of the opportunities to do more, and for that all would benefit from it. Thank you
very much indeed. Dr. Williams, your closing remarks?
Thank you. We have in Grenada here the Sustainable Development Plan 2035. It's very ambitious, it's very realistic. I think a lot of work has gone into it. People have said what they want to see in education and health, in our urban cities, in our climate programming, across the board. The 17 SDGs have been outlined. None of them will be attainable if the climate onslaught is not halted, in fact isn't reversed. We cannot make progress in agriculture unless there is improvement in the climate situation. Neither can we make work if we don't have good balance between the participation of men and women. So as Elena said, the intersection between gender justice and climate justice is important for the country, because we're then able to achieve our stated goals. So I want to encourage all of us to understand that particular point and then to act on it, to make sure that as we mainstream gender, as we treat boys and girls fairly, men and women equally, that we also understand that that will have an impact on our ability, the strengthening of our ability to respond. And lastly, I want to encourage particularly young women to get involved at the global level, the regional of course, but at the global level. I cut my teeth, my climate teeth, at the international level really. And that's really an arena where the negotiations for what we are to do and what we are to benefit from is decided. And therefore, young scholars in science, in gender, in social policy can find a place to advance the positions and the needs of our Caribbean countries by becoming international advocates through the small island states or any other arrangement that they can find. There's space waiting at the global level for young women. I know because I took one young woman to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt for the COP last November, and it transformed her, and I'm watching her now as she transforms other young people. So this is the invitation to young women and men on International Women's Day. Girls and women, step forward.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. And the final word goes to Minister Knight.
Thank you so very much. So let me thank you as well for having me on the program. And I'll say three things. One, at the global level, we must continue the pressure on the international system to recognize the significant impact that climate change will have on us, that the climate crisis will have on us in the Caribbean, in small states, and the pressure for reform, the pressure to be able to provide the necessary resources, and the pressure as well to ensure that they change the way that they deliver those resources is going to be critical. And again, reiterating the call for it to be a whole of CARICOM agenda. I think secondly, in the context of political leadership and policy making, there is a challenge for us to make sure that we continue address the issue of what I'm going to call policy design, and making sure that we continually have a gender responsive and a gender lens in terms of our policy making, particularly when we look at the impacts of gender on women. And that is a challenge, because sometimes we may not always be as focused on that. But how we design, we have to continue to be able to make sure that we hold ourselves accountable for that. The third thing, at the individual household level, there is significant agency in our actions as citizens. Yeah. So as citizens, the power to be able to ensure, again, to hold the government accountable for what happens, for the policies, for the way the policies are designed, for making sure that they're delivered in the best possible way. There's agency in that voice, but there's also agency in our own individual responsibility to make sure that we are prepared and aware. And if we can align those three things, I think then that we can begin to reposition our societies in the context of looking at these issues of climate and gender equality.
Thank you very much, Minister Knight. Again, I thank you three distinguished women very much for accepting our invitation. It was late, but nevertheless, you availed yourself to be here to have this discussion. Thank you very much again. We also say a very special thanks to our partners for making this program possible: Republic Bank, Hubbard's, and Classic Lighting. And of course, everyone else who contributed. Special thanks to my dear friend and co-producer, Mr. Leon Charles. I thank you so very much. Until next week, when we look at climate and water, do have a good night. All the best.
Thank you.